The day had begun like any other. The sun peeked through the slits of my blinds, casting stripes of light across my cluttered apartment floor. I rose with the familiar weight of routine, the soft hum of city life filtering in through an open window. It was a comforting monotony, a predictable cycle of work, meals, and sleep. My apartment, a small sanctuary amidst the chaos, was filled with mementos of a life carefully curated. Books with creased spines, photographs of places visited. By midday, I found myself at the beach, as was custom on Sundays. The ocean's edge was a mere 2 miles from my apartment, a stretch of sand that served as my respite from the urban sprawl. It was here, amidst the rhythmic crashing of waves and the distant calls of seagulls, that I felt most at peace. The sky was an unbroken expanse of blue, and the air carried the salty tang of the sea. I walked along the shoreline, my feet sinking into the wet sand, a book tucked under my arm. I had discovered a secluded spot further down the coast, where a cluster of rocks provided shelter from the wind. It was here that I would sit, read, and lose myself in stories that took me far from my own life. Today, as I settled onto the rocks and opened my book, a sense of calm enveloped me. The sun warmed my skin, and the sound of the sea served as a soothing backdrop. For a moment, the world felt perfect and untouched. It was then that I noticed a reflection. At first it seemed to be a trick of the light, a mere distortion in the water's surface. But as I looked closer, I realized it was something else entirely. There, within the rippling mirror of the shallow tide pool, was my face, but it was not quite right. The eyes that stared back were my own, yet there was something in their depths, a flicker of recognition that did not belong to me. They seemed to hold an expression of knowing, an awareness that sent a shiver up my spine. I blinked and the reflection was gone, replaced by the gentle lapping of the tide against the rocks. My heart quickened, but I dismissed the oddity as fatigue or an overactive imagination. Still, an unease settled into my bones, a whisper of something lurking just beyond comprehension. The remainder of the afternoon passed uneventfully, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The sensation persisted as I left the beach and returned home, the comfort of my apartment now tinged with the echo of that unnerving encounter. Over the following days, the disturbances became more pronounced. At first it was subtle, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, the feeling of a presence when I was certain I was alone. Then, more tangible signs emerged. Objects in my apartment seemed to shift positions overnight. A book would be found open to a page I had not yet read. A photograph would be turned face down. Each incident was small, yet together they wove a pattern of intrusion. I tried to rationalize the occurrences, attributing them to stress or forgetfulness, but the reflection continued to haunt me, appearing in unexpected places, the glint of a knife in the kitchen, the darkened screen of my laptop, the polished surface of my bathroom mirror. Each time, it was the same. My face, but not mine, with eyes that peered into my soul as though unearthing secrets I was unaware of possessing. One night as I lay in bed, the silence was broken by a soft whisper. It was a sound barely audible, like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze. I sat up, straining to hear, but the room was still. Yet the whisper continued, a persistent murmur that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Goosebumps prickled my skin as the realization dawned that it was my own voice, yet it spoke words I could not recognize. Sleep eluded me, and I found myself wandering the apartment in the early hours, checking locks, ensuring that shadows remained mere shadows. but the reflection awaited me in every reflective surface, its expression growing ever more sinister, as though taunting me with knowledge I could not grasp. Desperation drove me back to the beach, seeking answers where the mystery had begun. The shoreline was deserted, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I stood at the edge of the water, feeling the pull of the tide and the weight of the sky pressing down. I wanted to confront the reflection, to demand its purpose. The tide pools lay before me, their surfaces glassy and still. I approached cautiously, peering into their depths. My reflection stared back, unchanged, yet in its eyes was a malevolence that shook me to my core. I reached out, my fingers brushing the water's surface, disturbing the image. As the ripples spread, a voice filled my mind, a voice not my own. "You took what was mine," it whispered, the words reverberating through my skull. "Now, it's my turn." I stumbled back, heart pounding. Memories flashed before me, fragments of moments I could not place. A woman, her face obscured, reaching out, a sense of loss, of a promise broken. I could feel the truth edging closer, the walls of my denial crumbling. Returning home, I plunged into research, scouring local history and archives for any mention of hauntings or supernatural occurrences. Hours turned into days, and finally, I found a name. Eliza. She had lived near the beach a century ago, her life cut short by tragedy. Her story was one of love betrayed, her death shrouded in mystery. It was said her spirit lingered, seeking retribution against those who wronged her. The pieces fell into place, each revelation a weight upon my conscience. I had unknowingly disturbed her rest, perhaps by taking something that belonged to her, a trinket found in the sand, a photograph misplaced. Whatever it was, the consequences were now mine to bear. The reflection grew bolder, appearing at all hours, mocking me with its presence. I could no longer distinguish my own thoughts from the whispers that filled my mind. My reflection's eyes followed me, watching, waiting. It was consuming me, this spectral bond, pulling me deeper into a reality where the lines blurred between the living and the dead. I felt her presence constantly, a shadow at the edge of my vision, a chill in the air. The climax came one stormy night. The wind howled outside, rain lashing against the windows with relentless fury. I stood in the bathroom, staring into the mirror, determined to confront my tormentor. My reflection loomed, eyes dark and accusing. "Why?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" The answer was a cacophony of images and emotions, a torrent of grief and anger. The truth of her betrayal played out before me, a story of love, loss, and vengeance. She wanted justice, a wrong to be righted, her tormented soul to find peace. I realized then that her pain was my own, a shared burden that bound us. I had to acknowledge her story to give voice to the voiceless. I spent the night writing feverishly, recounting her tale, ensuring that her memory would not fade into obscurity. As dawn broke, a sense of calm washed over me. The reflection was gone, leaving only my own weary visage. The whispers had ceased, and the apartment felt lighter, as though a great weight had been lifted, yet a lingering fear remained. I had glimpsed into a world beyond my understanding, where restlessness could breach the boundaries of life and death. I knew now that the past never truly fades, that some spirits remain tethered to this world by unresolved ties. Even as I resumed my routine, the memory of Eliza stayed with me, a reminder of the unseen forces that shape our lives. I continued to visit the beach, no longer seeking solitude, but instead offering silent tribute to those who had come before. The ocean, with its vast, unknowable depths, seemed a fitting monument to her memory. And sometimes, when the wind whispered just right, I could almost hear her voice, a soft murmur carried across the waves, a promise that she had found peace. Yet, I could never quite shake the feeling that she might still be watching, her eyes forever lingering in the reflections of my world. I've always loved my grandmother Victoria's house, with its rambling corridors and sun-dappled rooms, brimming with a kind of old-world charm that the new houses never seem to capture. Nestled at the edge of a small town, it whispered stories of bygone eras through the creaks of its wooden floors and the soft rustle of the wind through its ancient trees. I spent many summers there, enveloped in the warmth of my grandmother's love and the timeless beauty of her home. The house was a treasure trove of hidden corners and secret spaces, but the basement was always off limits. "Too dangerous," Grandma Victoria would say with a mysterious smile, her eyes twinkling as if she held an amusing secret. As a child, I was too busy exploring the attic's wonders or playing in the garden to give it much thought. But as I grew older, the basement's forbidden nature piqued my curiosity, stirring a slow, burning intrigue that lingered in the back of my mind. When Grandmother Victoria passed away, the house was left to me in her will. Returning after many years, I found it unchanged, as if time had stopped during my absence. The familiar scent of lavender and old books greeted me as I stepped inside, flooding my senses with nostalgia. I walked through the rooms, my fingers brushing against weathered furniture and faded wallpaper, the past echoing with every step. It wasn't long before my thoughts returned to the basement. Standing before its old wooden door, I felt a strange compulsion, as if something on the other side was calling to me. I hesitated, my hand hovering above the doorknob, my mind a whirl of anticipation and unease. Finally, I turned the knob, and the door creaked open, releasing a cool breath of air that seemed to exhale secrets long buried. The basement stretched before me in shadowed silence, its depths unknown and uncharted. A single bare bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting a dim glow that barely reached the corners of the room. Dust motes swirled in the light, dancing to a rhythm of their own. The air was thick with age, and a faint, musty smell enveloped me as I descended the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. It was a typical basement, filled with forgotten relics of the past, old trunks, broken furniture, and stacks of yellowed newspapers. Yet there was something else, a palpable presence that seemed to watch from the shadows, unseen yet deeply felt. My skin prickled, and I shivered despite the warmth of my sweater. As I explored, my attention was drawn to a peculiar object in the corner, an antique mirror, its ornate frame tarnished with age. Its surface was clouded with dust, but as I wiped it clean, a chill slithered down my spine. The reflection showed not just me and the cluttered space, but something else, a distortion that flickered at the edge of my vision, a fleeting shadow that vanished the moment I tried to focus on it. A sense of foreboding enveloped me, and I retreated upstairs, my mind a whirl of unease and unanswered questions. My mind a whirl of unease and unanswered questions. I tried to dismiss it, attributing my anxiety to the eerie atmosphere of the basement, yet the feeling clung to me like a second skin. I found myself drawn back there day after day, compelled to understand what lay beneath the surface of my grandmother's home. The disturbances began subtly, a series of minor, inexplicable occurrences that made me question my sanity. Objects would be moved from their places, soft whispers would echo through the house, and I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. At first, I rationalized these as the tricks of an overactive imagination, but the sense of being watched grew stronger with each passing day. I began dreaming of the mirror, vivid nightmares that left me breathless and disoriented. In them, the reflection was not my own, but a warped, twisted figure that stared back at me with hollow eye. It would reach through the glass, and I would waken with a start, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. Driven by a mixture of fear and determination, I delved into the house's history, searching for any clues that might explain the unsettling events. I sifted through family records, old letters, and forgotten diaries, piecing together fragments of the past in hopes of making sense of the present. It was during one of these searches that I stumbled upon a faded photograph, tucked away in a dusty album. It was a portrait of my grandmother as a young woman, standing beside a man whose face was eerily similar to the reflection in the mirror. The photograph was accompanied by a letter, its ink faded but legible. It detailed a tragic story, one of love and loss, of a forbidden romance that ended in betrayal and madness. The man in the photograph was not a stranger, but a part of our family's history, a specter tied to the house by a bond of unfulfilled promises and unavenged wrongs. The realization struck me with the force of a gale, and I felt the weight of an ancestral sorrow settle upon my shoulders. The disturbances were not mere figments of my imagination, but echoes of the past that had seeped into the present, seeking resolution and release. The basement, with its hidden secrets and shadowed corners, was the epicenter of this spectral unrest. Determined to confront the entity that haunted our family, I returned to the basement, the air thick with anticipation. The mirror stood in its corner, an unassuming portal to another world, and I approached it with a mixture of fear and resignation. I stared into its depths, my reflection wavering as if caught in a gentle breeze. Then, as if summoned by my presence, the image in the mirror shifted. The shadowy figure emerged once more, its features clearer and more defined. It gazed at me with eyes full of sorrow and regret, a silent plea for understanding and forgiveness. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold surface of the glass, and felt a jolt of electricity surged through my body. The room around me faded, replaced by a vision of the past. I stood in the house as it once was, vibrant and full of life. I saw my grandmother, young and beautiful, smiling as she danced with the man from the photograph. Their joy was palpable, a radiant glow that illuminated the space. But as the scene unfolded, darkness crept in, overshadowing their happiness with shadows of betrayal and despair. I watched as their love unraveled, torn apart by forces beyond their control. The man's face twisted with anguish as he faded into the shadows, leaving my grandmother alone and heartbroken. The vision dissolved into darkness, and I was thrust back into the present, breathless and shaken. The mirror's surface was calm once more, reflecting only my own weary face. But I knew the entity still lingered, bound to the house by the chains of its unresolved past. I whispered a promise, a vow, to uncover the truth and bring peace to the restless spirit, hoping my words would bridge the chasm between our worlds. In the days that followed, the disturbances subsided, their intensity diminishing with each passing moment. The house seemed lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. Yet the presence remained, a gentle reminder of unfinished business. I continued my research, determined to honor my promise and lay the past to rest. I found solace in the quiet moments, in the creak of the floorboards and the whisper of the wind through the trees. The house, once a source of fear and uncertainty, became a sanctuary, a place where the past and present coexisted in fragile harmony. I felt a connection to my ancestors, a kinship that transcended time and space, and knew I was not alone in my quest. Though the mirror still stood in the basement, its secrets lay dormant, waiting for the day when the story would finally be complete. Perhaps that day would come soon, or perhaps it would take years of unraveling the tangled threads of history. Until then, I remained vigilant, a guardian of the house and its hidden truths. The lingering fear was no longer one of dread, but of awe at the mysteries that lay beyond our understanding. The supernatural had woven itself into the fabric of my life, transforming fear into acceptance, the unknown into a path of discovery. I would continue to walk this path, guided by the whispers of the past and the light of the present. Victoria's house had become more than just a home. It was a testament to the resilience of love and the enduring bonds that transcend time. In its embrace, I found my purpose, a calling to uncover the hidden evils and restore balance to the world. And though the shadows might still flicker at the edges of my vision, I faced them with courage, knowing that I was part of a story much larger than myself. A story of redemption, hope, and the enduring power of the human spirit.
I had always been captivated by the allure of abandoned places. They spoke to me, their silence echoing the stories of lives once lived, reminding me of the passage of time and the inevitability of decay. Among these forgotten relics of human history, the house at the end of Wisteria Lane was the most intriguing. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones, a relic shunned and left to wither away, its tales buried beneath layers of dust and neglect. Summer had come early that year, the air heavy with the promise of storms to come. I found myself drawn to the house one steamy afternoon, the sun glaring down with an oppressive weight. The path leading there was overgrown, a testament to how long it had been since anyone cared to maintain it. As I approached, the house loomed, a dark silhouette against the vibrant sky, its windows like vacant eyes watching my progress. I had visited many such places in my quest to document the forgotten, my ways respectful and cautious. There was an unspoken rule in these endeavors, a need to tread lightly, to feel the pulse of the place before venturing too deeply into its shadows. The house, at a glance, was unremarkable. Its paint peeled in long strips, the wood beneath bleached by sun and rain. Scattered about were remnants of a garden that had once been tended with care, but now lay in disarray, overrun by weeds and wildflowers. Despite its dilapidated state, the house exuded a certain charm, a melancholic beauty in the way nature had begun reclaiming it. Vines clung to the porch, twisting around the balusters like the fingers of some forgotten specter refusing to let go. I paused at the threshold, feeling the shift in the air as I crossed from the outside world into the domain of the past. Inside, the house was a world unto itself. The air was cooler, tinged with the scent of dust and something else, something that whispered of age and memories long gone. My footsteps echoed softly against the wooden floors, and I took care to move slowly, absorbing every detail. Here was a life once vibrant, now reduced to echoes and shadows. The rooms were strewn with evidence of abandonment, furniture shrouded in dust, a piano standing against one wall, its keys yellowed and silent. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, casting patterns of light and shadow that danced across the floor like ghosts at play. I felt an odd sense of peace here, as if I had stepped into a sanctuary where time itself had been suspended. It was in the parlor that I first noticed the disturbance. The air seemed to thicken, a subtle change that set my senses tingling. The feeling was akin to standing on the edge of a deep pool, aware of the depths below, but unable yet to see what might lurk there. I brushed it off as nerves, the product of my own overactive imagination coupled with the oppressive heat outside. I continued my exploration, moving to the upper floors. The staircase creaked under my weight, each step a protest against my intrusion. Here, the decay was more pronounced. The roof had given way in places, allowing rain and debris to pile up, creating pockets of ruin that spoke of nature's relentless advance. One room in particular caught my attention. The door was ajar, and I felt an inexplicable pull to enter. It was a bedroom, once belonging to a child, if the faded wallpaper of sailboats and faraway lands was any indication. A small bed sat in one corner, its covers neatly arranged as though the owner would return at any moment. A collection of toys lay scattered on the floor, frozen mid-play in a scene of innocence cut short. As I stood there, a sense of unease crept over me. It was as if the room was watching me, the air charged with an anticipation that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I shook my head, dismissing the feeling as paranoia. It was just an old house, after all, and I was allowing my imagination to get the better of me. Returning downstairs, I wandered back into the parlor, where I noticed something peculiar, a book, pristine and untouched by the dust that blanketed everything else. It lay open on a side table, its pages filled with an elegant script that seemed to dance in the dim light. The words were nonsensical, a jumble of letters and symbols that made no sense. I felt a chill race down my spine, a warning echoing in the silence. Despite my growing discomfort, I found myself drawn to the book. It was as if it held an answer to a question I hadn't yet asked, a key to the mystery the house represented. I reached out, my fingers brushing the paper, and felt a jolt, as if the book recognized my touch. The sensation was gone as quickly as it had come, leaving me puzzled and uneasy. Night was falling, the shadows lengthening and merging into the encroaching darkness. It was time to leave, and yet I hesitated, a part of me reluctant to step back into the world outside. This house, for all its decay and ruin, held a peculiar allure, a promise of secrets yet to be uncovered. As I made my way to the door, a sound stopped me. It was soft, almost imperceptible, like a whisper caught on a wing. I turned, my heart thudding in my chest, but the room was empty, the only movement the play of shadows in the fading light. I shook my head, trying to dispel the sense of unease that clung to me like a shroud. I stepped outside, the cool evening air a relief after the heavy atmosphere within. The house loomed behind me, dark and silent, yet I felt as if it watched my retreat with a knowing gaze. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving something behind, something important that I couldn't quite grasp. That night, sleep eluded me. My dreams were filled with images of the house, the sense of being watched ever present, a shadow lurking just beyond my awareness. I awoke several times, heart racing, convinced I had heard a voice, a soft murmur that faded the moment I opened my eyes. Days passed, but the memory of the house lingered, an itch that refused to be scratched. I found myself returning to Wisteria Lane, drawn by an insatiable curiosity and a need to understand what had happened there. The house stood as it always had, a sentinel of the forgotten, yet I felt a change in the air, a charge that set my nerves on edge. The book was still there, untouched, and this time I dared to read beyond the first few lines. The symbols seemed to shift, forming patterns that teased the edge of my understanding. I was no linguist, but the script felt ancient, familiar in a way that was unsettling. As I read, a sense of unease crept over me, as if the house itself was aware of my intrusion and disapproved. It was then I heard it, a soft laugh, a child's giggle echoing through the empty room. It was a sound that chilled me to the bone, the innocence of it juxtaposed against the desolation surrounding me. I stood frozen, every instinct screaming at me to leave, yet I found myself unable to move. The laughter faded, and with it, the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over the house seemed to lift, if only slightly. I shook myself from my stupor, forcing myself to move, to leave before I was ensnared by the house's mysteries. As I turned, my eyes caught a flicker of movement, a shadow, there and then gone, just at the edge of my vision. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with questions and possibilities. Something about that house had changed me, had awakened a part of me that I wasn't ready to confront. I found myself speaking aloud, as if trying to reassure myself that I was alone, that there were no voices whispering in my ear. Yet, even as I spoke, I knew it was a lie. The house had left its mark, a lingering weight in my mind that refused to be dismissed. I found myself returning again and again, drawn by an insatiable need to uncover its secrets, even as I feared what I might find. Each visit left me more conflicted, the lines between reality and imagination blurring until I could no longer trust my own senses. I saw faces in the shadows, heard whispers in the silence, and felt a presence that pressed against my consciousness, demanding attention. It was during one such visit that I discovered the truth. The house was not haunted by the spirits of those who had once lived there. It was haunted by the memories of what could have been. It was a place outside of time, a repository of lost dreams and forgotten hopes, suspended between the world of the living and the realm of the past. The book was the key, a doorway to understanding the house's true nature. It was a record of those who had come before, those who had been drawn by the same inexorable pull, only to be consumed by the house's need for stories. I saw their lives play out in fragments, glimpses of happiness tinged with the sorrow of what was lost. As the realization dawned, I felt a calm settle over me. The house was not my enemy. It was a guardian, preserving the echoes of what once was, a reminder of the fragility of life and the inevitability of decay. It was a place of redemption, a sanctuary for the lost and forgotten, offering solace to those willing to listen. I left the house that day with a sense of peace, knowing that I had been entrusted with its secrets. The whispers followed me still, a soft chorus of voices guiding me, reminding me of the stories yet to be told. The house had claimed me, not as a prisoner, but as a custodian of its mysteries, a guardian of the past. And so I remained, drawn back to Wisteria Lane again and again, a willing participant in the dance of shadows and light. Beyond redemption, beyond fear, I find solace in the knowledge that the house will endure, its stories waiting for those brave enough to listen.
Meeting someone's parents is always a nerve-wracking experience, a rite of passage that can either strengthen or strain the fragile fabric of a budding relationship. I was well aware of this as I approached the weathered Victorian house, nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, the air around it suffused with the sterile chill of late autumn. The house belonged to Lydia's parents, and tonight was the night I was to meet them for the first time. Lydia had described them with affection, a charming middle-aged couple with a penchant for old-fashioned hospitality and quaint traditions. I had packed my best manners along with a bouquet of flowers I knew would go unappreciated but presented the right sentiment. As I stepped onto the porch, the old wood creaking underfoot, Lydia gave me a reassuring smile and her hand, which I held with a mixture of gratitude and trepidation. The door swung open before Lydia could even knock, revealing a petite woman with graying hair pulled back into a neat bun. Her sharp, blue eyes darted between us, assessing. She wore an expression that was simultaneously welcoming and scrutinizing, as if she were both pleased and mildly suspicious. "You must be Daniel," she said, her voice carrying a melodious lilt that belied the intensity of her gaze. "I'm Ruth. Do come in." The hallway was narrow and dimly lit, the walls adorned with family portraits that seemed to watch as we passed. A faint scent of lavender and something vaguely metallic lingered in the air. Ruth led us into a cozy living room, where a fire crackled in the hearth. The room was an eclectic mix of antique furniture and modern comforts. An old gramophone stationed in one corner, its horn gleaming in the firelight. A man, presumably Lydia's father, sat in an armchair, his face obscured by a newspaper. "Ah, Thomas," Ruth called, and he lowered the paper, revealing a kindly face lined with the marks of age and laughter. His smile was genuine, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "This is Daniel, Lydia's friend." Thomas rose with a grace that belied his years and offered a hand. "Nice to finally meet you, Daniel. Lydia has told us a lot about you." "Likewise, sir," I replied, shaking his hand. It was warm and firm, a reassuring touch. We settled in, engaging in the usual small talk that accompanies such introductions. Ruth served tea in delicate china cups, and Thomas regaled me with tales of his youth, each story punctuated with Lydia's embarrassed laughter. It was also perfectly ordinary, and yet there was something about the house, or perhaps the atmosphere, that felt slightly off-kilter. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was an underlying tension, a subtle dissonance that hummed just below the surface of things. It was as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As the evening wore on, the initial awkwardness subsided, replaced by a more relaxed camaraderie. Lydia, ever the attentive daughter, suggested we play a game. "An old family tradition," she explained. Ruth and Thomas exchanged a glance that was almost imperceptible, a fleeting shadow of something unsaid passing between them. "Perfect idea," Ruth said, her voice a touch too bright. "We always play charades when we have guests over. It's a bit of fun." And so the game began. We laughed at each other's inept attempts to mime obscure phrases, the room filled with the warmth of shared amusement. But as we played, the sense of unease I'd felt earlier began to intensify. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally in the flickering firelight, and occasionally I caught Ruth or Thomas watching me with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to the game. During my turn, mid-gesture, the room went cold, and a gust of wind swept through, extinguishing the fire and casting us into darkness. There was a moment of confused silence, broken only by the sound of Lydia's voice, calm and steady, telling us to stay put while she found a flash. I stood there, awkward and blind, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I could sense movement, the soft rustle of clothing, the whisper of breath. And then, without warning, the lights flickered back on, revealing Lydia standing in the doorway with a flashlight in hand and a perplexed expression. "What on earth?" she said, but her words trailed off as we all took in the scene before us. The room had changed, subtly, but unmistakably. Furniture had shifted ever so slightly, and the family portraits now faced the walls, their painted eyes hidden from view. A shiver ran down my spine, the hairs on my arms standing on end. It was as if the house itself had shifted, revealing a glimpse of something ancient and unknowable lurking just beneath its surface. Ruth and Thomas exchanged another one of those inscrutable glances, and I felt a sudden, irrational surge of fear. There was something they weren't telling us, something that hovered in the space between us like an unspoken secret. "We must have blown a fuse," Thomas said, his voice even, though a hint of strain laced his words. "Why don't we take a break from the game? Ruth, why don't you show Daniel the garden? It's quite lovely under the moonlight." Ruth nodded, her smile thin and brittle. "Yes, of course. Come along, Daniel." I followed her out of the room, casting a last glance at Lydia, who watched us go with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. The hallway seemed longer than before, the shadows deeper, and the portraits once again seemed to follow us with their eyeless gaze. We stepped out into the garden, the night air cool and bracing. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the manicured hedges and flower beds. Ruth led me along a winding path, her footsteps soundless on the grass. "It's beautiful here," I said, trying to dispel the oppressive silence that had settled around us. "Yes," Ruth replied, her voice distant. She paused, turning to face me, her eyes reflecting the moonlight in an unsettling way. There's something about this place, though. Something that's always been a part of it. I frowned, not quite understanding. What do you mean? She hesitated, as if weighing her words. The house, it has a way of revealing things. Things that are often best left unseen. An involuntary shiver passed through me. Like what? Ruth looked past me, her gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance. The past, mostly, but sometimes, the future. Her words hung in the air, heavy and dissonant. I wanted to question her further, to ask what she meant, but the look in her eyes stopped me. There was a depth of knowing there, a kind of resigned acceptance that chilled me to the bone. We returned to the house in silence, the night closing in around us. Lydia and Thomas were waiting in the living room, their faces inscrutable in the shifting shadows. They seemed relieved to see us, though I couldn't shake the feeling that their relief was tinged with something else. Something darker. "Everything okay?" Lydia asked, her eyes searching mine. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just admiring the garden." She nodded, though she didn't seem entirely convinced. We spent the rest of the evening in strained conversation, the earlier camaraderie replaced by a tense, watchful silence. When it was finally time to leave, I felt a strange mixture of relief and regret, as if I were stepping away from something vital and dangerous. Geraldine shrugged. As we drove away from the house, Lydia was quiet, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. I wanted to ask her about the house, about the sense of unease that had permeated our visit, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I watched the shadows of the trees dance across the windshield, their movements oddly hypnotic. Several weeks passed, and the memory of that night began to fade, relegated to the realm of strange but inconsequential experiences. Lydia and I continued to see each other, our relationship growing stronger despite the unspoken tension that lingered between us. Then, one night, as we lay in bed, Lydia turned to me, her eyes wide and filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, and I nodded, urging her to continue. "It's about the house," she said, hesitating. "There's something about it that you need to know." I listened, my heart pounding in my chest as she spoke of the house's history, its odd quirks and unexplained phenomena. She told me of the whispers, the strange occurrences, the feeling of being watched. And she told me about the night her brother had disappeared, years ago, when she was just a child. "We never found him," she said, her voice trembling. "He was just gone, and ever since, there's been this presence." I held her close, trying to offer comfort, even as a cold dread settled over me. The house, with its shifting shadows and hidden secrets, was more than just an old family home. It was a place where the boundaries between the known and the unknown blurred. A place where the past and future collided in ways that defied explanation. Lydia's confession lingered in my mind, a haunting echo that refused to be silenced. I found myself thinking of the house at odd moments, its presence a constant undercurrent in my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching, waiting, patient and unyielding in its silent vigil. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself staring out the window, the moon casting a silvery glow over the world outside. I thought of Ruth's words, the hint of foreboding in her voice as she spoke of the house's hidden truths. In that moment, I understood that the house was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a living thing, a repository of memories and secrets, a guardian of the past and a harbinger of the future. Its presence was a constant, a reminder of the fragility of the boundary that separates the known from the unknown. The house had revealed itself to me, its inscrutable gaze fixed on the path ahead. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that I would return. Drawn by the pull of its mysteries, the lure of its secrets, I would stand once more before its weathered facade, my heart filled with both dread and anticipation. As I lay there, the darkness pressing in around me, I realized that the house had become a part of me, its shadow intertwined with my own, and though I feared what lay ahead, I knew that the house had already chosen me, its mark indelible and unforgiving. In the quiet of the night, with Lydia sleeping peacefully beside me, I felt the house's presence, a whisper on the edge of consciousness. It was a reminder, a promise, a warning. The house was waiting, and when the time came, I would answer its call. The shadows would dance, the whispers would rise, and the past would reveal itself, one secret at a time. In that moment of understanding, I knew that the house would haunt me forever, its mysteries forever entwined with my own. There was a calm to the small town of Eldridge that cloaked it like the morning mist. A town where the past lingered more palpably than the present, where the rhythm of life was as predictable as the seasons. This was where I found myself, seeking an escape from the relentless rush of the city. I had settled into an old house on the outskirts, a place of time-worn charm that seemed to have a soul of its own. The house was a creaking relic of another era, with floorboards that groaned underfoot and windows that rattled with the wind's whispers. Yet there was warmth to its worn surfaces, a history that wrapped around me like a comforting shroud. I had always found solace in places with stories to tell, and this house was full of them. Its walls were lined with echoes of laughter and tears, of lives lived and lost. It was not just a house. It was a tapestry of human experience. I spent my days restoring the house, slowly bringing its beauty back to life. There was a satisfying rhythm to it, the gentle scraping of paint, the steady hammering of nails. As I worked, I felt a kinship with those who had come before me, a connection to the past that was comforting in its continuity. It was as though the house welcomed me, enfolding me in its embrace, making me a part of its long history. But as the days grew shorter and the nights colder, a subtle shift began to creep into my idyllic sanctuary. It started with the smallest of disturbances, so minor that they seemed almost imagined. Shadows that lingered a moment longer than they should, a creak of the floorboards when no one was there. At first, I dismissed these as products of an old house settling, the sort of thing one would expect in a place such as this. Then, one evening, as I sat reading by the dim light of a single lamp, I heard a sound that didn't belong. It was a soft, shuffling noise, like the rustling of fabric or a whisper of wind through leaves. It came from the hallway, a place just out of sight. I paused, listening intently, but the sound had faded into the silence. I shook my head, chastising myself for being so easily spooked by the normal creaks of an aging home. However, the disturbances continued, each one a little stranger than the last. Objects moved from their places, small things at first, a book slightly askew, a chair not quite where I had left it. These were things that could be easily explained away. Perhaps I had moved them without thinking, distracted by my work. Yet, an undercurrent of unease began to take root in my mind, a whispering doubt that grew with each odd occurrence. As the days turned into weeks, the disturbances escalated. I would wake in the night to the sound of muffled voices, indistinct and distant, as if they came from rooms I had never entered. Once, I awoke to find the dining room table set for two, candles burning softly in the dark. My heart raced in my chest as I stared at the scene, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. I could feel a presence in the room, intangible yet undeniably there. Watching, I began to dread the night, the hours that stretched between dusk and dawn. They seemed to press down on me, heavy, with an unseen weight. It was during one of these long nights that I witnessed something that shattered any illusions I had about the nature of my intrusions. I had been lying in bed, half awake and listening to the rhythmic tick of the clock, when I heard it. A soft, dragging sound, as if something was being pulled across the floor. Slowly, I rose and crept to the doorway, peering into the shadowed hallway. There, in the dim light, I saw it. A figure, composed of everyday household items. It was an assemblage of the uncanny, a nightmarish mimicry of a man. Its body was formed from an assortment of objects, wooden spoons for fingers, a mop head for hair, and its face. Oh, its face. A patchwork of discarded fabric and shattered glass, glinting in the dark like a macabre jigsaw puzzle. It moved with an eerie grace, a silent marionette pulled by invisible strings. I stood frozen, terror rooting me to the spot as it turned its head toward me. Though it had no eyes, I felt its gaze, a chilling scrutiny that seemed to peel away my skin. And then it spoke, a voice made of whispers and echoes, words that chilled the blood in my veins. "Welcome home," it said. An invitation and a threat tangled into one. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. I fled to my room, locking the door behind me with trembling hands. Sleep was impossible, my mind racing with the memory of what I had seen, the entity that lurked within the house's shadows. By morning, the house was quiet again, sunlight filtering through the windows as if nothing had ever been amiss. Yet, the memory of the night lingered, a shroud that clung to me even in the bright light of day. I told myself I had imagined it, that the stress of moving and the solitude had conjured phantoms from the depths of my mind. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. The presence was real, and it was growing bolder with each passing night. It began to torment me in earnest, turning my sanctuary into a place of dread. It would manifest in various forms, each more grotesque than the last. Sometimes it was a towering figure made of curtains and lampshades. Other times a crawling mass of kitchen utensils, clinking and clattering with every movement. I became a prisoner in my own home, trapped by a malevolent force that seemed to revel in my fear. I dared not speak of it to anyone, fearing I would be dismissed as mad. Who would believe such a tale of a house that assembled itself into a creature of nightmares? Yet I could not leave, bound by some invisible tether that held me to the house, as if it had claimed me for its own. The days blurred into one another, each one a torment of waiting for the night to come. I grew gaunt and hollow-eyed, sleep elusive as the figure haunted my dreams. My work on the house ceased, the tools lying abandoned in the dust. The house seemed to mock me, its every creak and sigh a reminder of its hidden tenant. Then, one night, the entity made its intention clear. I awoke to find it standing at the foot of my bed, a grotesque silhouette against the moonlit window. It leaned closer, its form shifting and reassembling with fluid malice, and spoke with a voice that resonated through the room, a chorus of dissonant sounds. "Join us," it whispered, the words twisting in the air like smoke. "Become one with the house." The room spun around me, darkness closing in as I struggled to breathe. In that moment I understood what it wanted. The house was not just a building. It was a living thing, a vessel for something ancient and hungry. It fed on fear, on the souls of those it trapped within its walls, growing stronger with each victim it claimed. I realized, with a clarity born of desperation, that I had to act. I could not allow it to consume me, to make me a part of its twisted creation. Summoning every ounce of willpower, I pushed back against the panic, forcing myself to move to escape. I ran from the room, the house seeming to close in around me, its walls bending and shifting as if alive. I stumbled through the darkened hallway, the entity pursuing me with relentless determination. I could hear it behind me, the clatter of its makeshift limbs echoing through the house. Desperation let me speed, and I reached the front door, fumbling with the lock. It was there, looming over me, its form a blurred nightmare in the darkness. With a final frantic effort, I wrenched the door open, cold night air rushing in to greet me. I stumbled out onto the porch, falling to my knees in the dew-damp grass. The house loomed behind me, silent and watchful, a sleeping beast once more. It was over for now, but I knew the entity was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next opportunity. I left Eldridge the next day, abandoning the house to its fate. I returned to the city, to the comforting anonymity of crowds and noise, but the memory of the house haunted me still. Even now, I cannot escape the feeling that it watches, that it waits for my return. In the dead of night, when the shadows stretch long and the silence is thick as fog, I hear it whispering my name, calling me back to its waiting embrace. The house, the Nightman, is patient, and I fear that one day I may answer its call. Lawrence, Washington, was a town known for its tranquility, nestled quietly between the gentle folds of forested hills and the whispering banks of the lazy river. The people there lived simple lives, their days marked by routine and rhythm. Morning light filtered through the dense canopy overhead, casting dappled shadows upon the streets. It was a place where nothing much happened, or at least that was the way it seemed to those who lived there. Yet, in the center of this serene town stood a house unlike any other, with secrets that ran as deep as the roots of the ancient trees surrounding it. The Kettleworth House was its name, though few dared to speak it aloud. For generations it had been a fixture in Lawrence, its looming presence both a source of fascination and fear. The house was a grand structure, its Victorian spires cutting sharply into the sky, its windows dark and hollow like the eyes of a forgotten god. The townsfolk often whispered about its origins, spinning tales of tragedy and woe. They said the house was cursed, that no one who entered could ever truly leave. The stories varied, but the undertone was always the same. A warning, a chill that settled in the bones. I had heard these stories all my life growing up in Lawrence. My grandmother used to tell me tales of the house when I was a child, her voice hushed and her eyes wide with the haunted remembrance of things better left unspoken. He claimed that the house held a dark power, one that ensnared those who dared to trespass upon its grounds. "It's not just haunted," she would say, her voice trembling slightly. "It's alive." Still, curiosity is a stubborn thing. When I was offered the chance to work as a caretaker for the property, I couldn't resist. It seemed absurd after all. A house couldn't be alive. It was wood and stone, nothing more. The pay was good, and the opportunity to live in such a grand old home was too tempting to resist. The first few days were uneventful. I moved into the small apartment above the carriage house and began my duties. The grounds were overgrown, and I set to work clearing paths and trimming hedges. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, but the work was satisfying. I convinced myself that the unease I felt was simply due to the isolation. At night, the house creaked and groaned, adjusting to the cool breath of the evening. I ignored the strange sounds, attributing them to the settling of old timbers and the scurrying of nocturnal creatures. Then, the first disturbance occurred. I had been working late, tidying up the garden, when I heard it. A voice, faint and distant. It was a soft, mournful sound, like the echo of a forgotten melody. At first I thought it was the wind, but as I paused to listen, I realized it came from within the house. I hesitated, fear prickling at the edges of my mind. But curiosity, that persistent companion, urged me onward. I entered through the back door, the heavy wood sighing as it swung open. The interior was as I remembered it from my childhood, a labyrinth of rooms filled with dust-covered furniture and the weight of years. The voice led me to the parlor, a grand room with a high ceiling and windows that overlooked the garden. It was empty, yet the voice persisted, a lilting whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stood there, frozen, until the sound faded into the silence. I shook off the experience as imagination, a trick of the mind. But the disturbances continued. They grew more frequent and varied, faint footsteps echoing in the halls, doors opening and closing with a soft click, the scent of lilies pervading the air without a single flower in sight. Each occurrence was subtle, small enough that I could almost convince myself they weren't real. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The house had a presence, a tangible weight that pressed down upon me. It watched, it listened, it waited. The escalation was gradual, an insidious creeping that seeped into every aspect of my life. Sleep became elusive, my nights filled with restless dreams and half-heard whispers. I would wake in a sweat, the feeling of being observed, a constant shadow at the edge of my consciousness. During the day, the house seemed brighter, almost welcoming, but the darkness that lurked within its walls never truly left. I tried to reach out to others, to find someone who understood, but the townsfolk were wary. They listened with careful expressions, nodding politely before changing the subject. It was as if they were afraid to acknowledge what they already knew, as if speaking of the house could invoke its wrath. Then came the night that changed everything. I awoke to a sound unlike any I had heard before. A low, resonant hum that filled the room, vibrating through the very marrow of my bone. It was a sound of power, of something ancient and unfathomable. There was no ignoring it, no pretending it was just another oddity of the house. This was different. This was real. Terrified, I rose from my bed and followed the sound through the darkened corridors. The walls seemed to breathe around me, expanding and contracting with each step. The air was thick with anticipation, the hum growing louder with every heartbeat. It led me to the basement, a place I had avoided since my arrival. The door was ajar, a thin sliver of darkness beckoning me forward. I descended the stairs with trembling legs, my mind screaming at me to turn back even as my feet pressed onward. The basement was vast, its shadows stretching into infinity. The hum was a living thing, pulsing in time with the beating of my own heart. And there, in the center of the room, I saw it, a figure, indistinct and shimmering as if woven from the very fabric of the night. It was both beautiful and terrible, an abomination wrapped in the guise of a dream. It spoke without words, its voice a symphony of sorrow and longing. You are part of this now, it seemed to say, bound to the house as I am. I wanted to flee, to escape the clutches of this eldritch presence. But my body was no longer my own. I was trapped, ensnared by the house and its timeless occupant. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, the weight of it dragging me down into despair. The climax came in a rush of understanding, a clarity that burned away the fog of fear and confusion. I saw the truth of the house, its dark heart laid bare. It was a prison, a place of endless cycle and suffering. No one could die within its walls, and thus no one could truly live. The occupants were trapped in a purgatory of existence, their souls bound to the house for eternity. I was not the first, nor would I be the last. We were all part of the same story, our lives woven into the fabric of the house itself. And as the truth settled over me, I felt my will begin to fade, merging with the will of the house. I was no longer an individual, but a whisper in its halls, another voice in its haunting symphony. In the end, it is not the fear of death that lingers, but the fear of the undying. The house remains silent and watchful, its secrets guarded by those of us who can never leave. And as the years pass, the town of Lawrence forgets, its people moving on while the house waits patiently for the next soul to wander through its doors. I am here still, a part of the undying house, my presence woven into its very being. I watch and I listen, my whispers joining the chorus of those who came before. And when the night falls and the shadows grow long, you can hear us, the mournful song of the undying, echoing through the hollow halls of the Kettleworth house.